Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Are you ready to take your React skills to the next level? Today, we will deep dive into three powerful React design patterns that will transform how you build applications scalable and maintainable as a front-end developer. First, we will see the container presentation pattern as we separate the logic from the presentation to make the component cleaner and more reusable. Next, we will deep dive into the custom hooks, which is a game changer for abstracting reusable logic in function components. And last, we will see the higher order component HOC, which is a classic React design pattern that superpowers the component by enhancing its capability. By the end of this video, you will not only learn about the React design patterns, but you also know how and when to use them efficiently in your projects. So, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Let's get started. Alright guys, so before we jump directly into the implementation of this React design pattern, we first really need to understand what this container and presentational pattern is. What is a smart component and what is a dumb component? And what are the pros and cons of using this? So let's go to the next slide and let's understand this. So we have this container presentational pattern where we have a single component. Now you divide this single component into two different components. The first will be a container component, which is also known as a smart component. And the second is the presentational component, which we also called as a dumb component. And the reason behind this segregating them into two is because of the separation of concern. We need to maintain this separation of concern. Now let's see the same thing with a different example. So let's say we have a user component. Now we divide this user component into two different components, which will be a user container and there will be a user list presentation. Now basically what will happen in this user container and what will happen in this user list presentation. So we will see that in the user container we have to manage the state, the API calls and the data fetching. And in the user list presentation, we will not have any side effects and this will be a purely presentational component. So if you want to have a user component where you want to fetch the list of users and then you have to display them, and we divide them into a container and a presentation component. So now let's see what are the pros and cons of using this container presentational pattern. So if we go for the pros, the first one is the separation of concern. And in separation of concern, we actually divide them into containers and presentational component. The next one is the improved reusability. Presentational components can be easily reused in different parts of our application as they don't depend on any of the state or the logic. Third is the simplified testing. Presentation components are easier to test as they are stateless and they don't rely on any of the effects or external data fetching. And the last is the enhanced maintainability. As we are using this separation of concern, the code base becomes more modular and it is easier to maintain and understand. Now we discuss about the pros. Let's see what are the cons of using this pattern. The first one is increased boilerplate, and this pattern introduces more files and boilerplate code, which can be sometimes a downside for a smaller application or a very simple component, as you will always have a container file and a presentation file. Next one will be overhead for smaller applications. It could be that sometimes smaller applications or components with a very minimum logic, the separation might feel like an over engineering. Third will be the potential prop drilling. Now the presentation components are purely based on the props that we pass from the container components. And sometimes if we have the nested presentation components, then prop drilling can be a problem. And the last one is the learning curve. Sometimes new developers to this pattern may find it initially complex to understand and implement correctly, especially when they are dealing with the larger applications. As we have already discussed the pros, cons, and what is the container presentational component, now let's go into the code base and let's implement it. So I have already bootstrapped my application using Vite, and if you want to bootstrap your application, you can just use the npm create vite @latest, and this is going to give you the React project. Now once I have the React project, I have made a change in the Vite config where I have added the server open as true and my port as 3001. Next, I have also made some change in my app.jsx. I have removed all the boilerplate code, and now let's try to run this application. So to run the application, I'm simply going to have this npm install, which is going to install all the dependencies for the project. I have already installed it, and then we will just do npm run, and then we will just do npm run dev, and this is going to start my application on localhost 3001. So we have this Vite plus React. Now, if we go back, the first thing what we are going to do is I'm going to change this. So I'm going to change this to H2, and I'm going to change here as users container presentation pattern. So I will just give this h2 tag where we have this one. And what basically we are going to do is we are going to have a problem statement where we have a user component, and to this user component we need to fetch the data from the API, and then we need to list all the users. And to use the API, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the request res. So I will have the request res, and this is a free API hosted. You can just use it and it will give you the fake data. So to get the list of users, I'm going to make use of this endpoint. So let's go back to our code base, and we are going to create a new folder first in my source folder. So I'm going to have a new folder as components. All right, then I'm going to create one more folder, and that folder will be containers, which is going to have all the containers. Now in the components, we create a new file, which is the user list.jsx. And in this user list of JSX, what I will do is I'm going to create this component. I will just use the RSC, which is going to give me a functional component. All right, now if I go to the containers, I'm going to go here and create a new file, which will be the user container.jsx. All right, I will use the RSC, and that is going to give me a functional component. As this is a container component, so this is a smart component. So all the states, application logic, data fetching, API calls will be managed within this container. So let's start with the states first. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant. I will have the users set users, and this is going to equals to the use state, and I'm going to give this as an empty array. All right, next I will also need a state for a loading. So I'm going to have the is loading, and then set is loading, and this is going to manage my loading state, and I'm going to give it as a boolean, and this is going to be a false initially. I will also need a third state which will be handling my errors and display the errors. So I will have the error set error, and this is going to be equals to the use state, and I'm going to have it as false. Now if you want to learn more basics about the React, like the states and how the React application works and everything, I have a complete video on it. You can just click on the card above and jump to it directly. Now once we have all the states, what I will do is I'm going to create a function which will be a get users, and this function is going to fetch the users from the server. I'm going to use it as an async. All right, now inside this, what I will do is first let's have this set loading, and I'm going to make this as true because we are going to fetch the data from the server. Next, I'm going to use a try catch block. All right, and in the catch block, if there is an error, what I will do is I'm going to set the error as true. So this will tell me that there is an error and we need to display an error message. I will also use a finally block, and in this finally block, I'm going to change this set loading, and this set loading I'm going to change it to false, as we have already true here. So we are going to change it false in the end once the API call is done. Now in this try block, what we need to do is let's have a constant response, and we are going to make use of a fetch to make an API call. So I will have the await fetch, and we need to pass the endpoint here. Since we are going to use the request reg, so let's take an endpoint. So we can take this endpoint. So what I will do is I'm going to copy this users, and let's put it here users, and we also need to give the domain, and this will be the domain. So I'm going to copy the domain and then put the domain here. So I'm going to have it here. So our endpoint will be https request.in/API/users, and this is going to give us the list of users. Now once we have the users, I'm going to change this to JSON. So I will have this response dot, let's have a JSON. All right, now what I can do is I can simply do a console.log, and I can simply log the JSON here. All right, now if we want to see what is this JSON, we have to make this API call. For that, what we have to call this get users. So what I will do is I will go here and I'm going to have a use effect, and let's make this API call using the use effect. So I'm going to have this use effect, and here I will have the get users. So this is going to make an API call for the get users, and I only want to run this once. All right, now once we have this, what I will do is we are not going to change anything here, but let's have this user list first. So for this user list, list, what we will do is we are simply going to have here as user list. Now I can make use of this user list and return it here. So in this JSX, what I will do is I will have the user list and I will pass the user list here. Now we can just make use of this user container into our app.jsx, and we can run and see what data we get back from our API. So I'm going to have the user container here. All right, let's go to the browser and let's check now. So I'm going to go to my browser, and in the browser, I'm going to go to the inspect element. All right, let's go to the console and I'm going to refresh it. And we see that we have this promise and this promise is pending. So what we can do is we can go back, and in this container, we have to use the await. So I'm going to go here. Let's use the await so that we can resolve this promise. And once we have this, now we see that we get the data. So these are the users that we are getting from the API call. So I'm going to go back here. We get the JSON. So here I will do a check that if JSON.data is not available, then we have to return from here. All right. And if it's available, then we are going to do the set user, and I'm going to set the JSON.data. All right. Now we have this information. We also have the user. What we can do is we can just pass those users as a prop into our user list, which is going to display the data. So first we are going to pass the users, and this will be equals to the users. Then we are also going to pass the loading state. So I'm going to have the loading as is loading. And the third we need to pass is the error. So I'm going to pass the error. So let's have the error. All right. So now we have done with this component. I will just remove this React. We are not using it. So I will remove it. And now the next we need to do is we need to work on this user list component. So let's go to the user list component. And in this user list component, what we will do is first let's have the props here. So I'm going to destructure the props, and this is going to give me the users loading, and it's going to give me the error. Now here what I will do is we will just make a check that if this loading is true, then in that case we just need to return, and I'm going to return a div which will have ... loading. All right. Similarly, if there is an error, so the error will become true. All right. And if there is an error, then in that case, I'm going to return here something went wrong. So now you will see that this component is purely displaying things based on the props it has received. And the last one will be if there are no users, then in that case, we can just use return null. All right. And now we can just display our list. So for displaying our list, what I will do is we are going to have a JSX. I'm going to have a div class name. I will have a class name as a flex. So I already have some class names added in my app.css. Then we will just display the user. So I'm going to have the user.length and user.map. And on this, what we can do is if there is a user, then we can just display that user. All right, I'm going to return a JSX from here. We are going to have a div, and on this div we can have a key which will be as a user ID. And then what we can do is we can just display the image. We can have the source of that image, and that source will be user.avatar. All right, we see there is an error, so we have missed a bracket here. So let's put this brackets. All right. And once we have the avatar, what we are going to do is I'm going to use a P, then I'm going to use a strong tag to display the username. So I'm going to have the user.first_name, and this is going to give me my username. And you will see that it is not giving me the suggestions because we are not using the TypeScript, but you will also see that there are some errors here. And this is that user is missing in props validation. Now this is because I'm using this ESLint, which is by default. So either you can do go quick fix and you can disable it, or you can also use the prop type. So to fix that, what we can do is I'm going to show you both the methods. For the first method, obviously, is you go to the here, you do a quick fix and you just disable it, then it will be gone for this line. Or the next approach is let's use the prop type. So what I will do is I'm going to have the import prop types, and this will be coming from the prop-types. And we are using this because we are not using a TypeScript. So we will get this linting error that the properties are not available or we are not validating these props. All right. So what I will do is let's use this prop types. And if I go here, then we can just use this component name first, user list dot, and we can just define the prop types here. So I'm going to have the prop type, and this is going to equal to an object where we are first going to have the users. All right. And for the users, I'm going to have the prop types. So we see that we have misspelled here. So I'm going to go here and this will become prop types. So here we will have the prop types, and this prop type we are going to have this an array of. So because users is going to be an array, so let's have an array of, and here we can define all the properties. So we are going to have the ID, which will be the prop types dot number, and we want this as is required. All right, after that we will also have the first name, and this first name will be prop types dot string, and we're going to have this as is required. Next will be the email. We are going to have the prop types dot string, so email will also be a string, and then I'm going to have it as is required. And the last one will be the avatar. I'm going to have the prop types dot string dot is required. All right, and I'm going to just change this to P. All right, so we see that we have validated all the props, and now you will see that we don't have any error on this users. Similarly, we will also do it for the loading. So let's have the loading, and here what I will do is I will have dot is required, and now we can just define it for the loading. So I'm going to have the prop types dot boolean, as loading is a boolean, so I'm going to have the boolean is required. And the last one will be the error. Error will be the prop types dot boolean dot is required. So now we have defined the prop types for this, and now we will not see any errors. The next we want to display is the user email address. So let's have the user dot email, and now you will see that we see the email here. All right, so we have defined this and we have also added it. Now let's go and let's check. So if I go and if I refresh it, we see that we have the images, we have the user list displayed here, and we also see there is a warning that it is failed prop type property users of this component user list has an invalid. We can fix this. What we can do is we can just go here and we can just create a constant user here, and this user will have the prop type dot shape. This is going to define what shape of data that the user will have. So we can just change this. I'm going to remove this, cut it and put it here. All right, and here I'm going to have it as is required, and we can just simply use the users here. So I'm going to have the user, and now if we go and check, so if I refresh it, so I'm going to change this to user, and now if I go and refresh it, then we don't see any errors, and we will also see that we have this prop types implemented here, and we have this our user list, and we have this user container which is managing all the state. Now basically you can also use this user list for some other purpose. You can just reuse this component, as this is a purely presentation component, and it will present the data based on the props that you're going to pass. And in the app.tsx we always refer to the user container. So this is the container presentation pattern which you can use in your large projects at your workplace, and you can also create a good impression at your workplace when you know such kind of a patterns and you implement them. All right guys, so before we jump directly to Visual Studio Code and start implementing this custom hook pattern, let's go through some slides and understand what is this pattern about and what are the pros and cons of using custom hook pattern in our application. So let's start with the simple that we have this app component, and in this app component we are having two components. The first one is the stopwatch component, and the second is the countdown component. So basically we are creating a stopwatch and a countdown component, and these two components are purely presentational components. Now the next question will come that where are we going to write all the business logic for building this stopwatch and the countdown component? So that's where we are going to make use of a use timer custom hook, and this use timer custom hook will be responsible to handle the state, the logic and all the side effects. Now we are also going to implement this, but before that we will need to understand what are the pros and cons of using custom hook pattern in our application. So the first pros is actually the code reusability. Custom hook allows us to extract and reuse the stateful logic across multiple components, and this actually promotes the DRY, which is the do not repeat yourself principle, and reduce the code duplication. The next one is the separation of concern, since we are encapsulating the logic into the custom hook, and this makes our component simpler and focus on rendering UI, as majority of the logic is handled by the hooks. The third one is the consistency. So with custom hooks, we ensure a consistent behavior across all components, as they all rely on the same logic that we have implemented in the hook. And the last one is the improved readability. Custom hook make our code more readable and maintainable, and because it encapsulates the complex logic into a single place, which can be reused across different parts of our application. Now let's discuss some of the cons of using this pattern. The first one is the learning curve. Developers new to React or hooks might find it a bit challenging to understand and implement a custom hook properly. The next one is the debugging complexity. Debugging sometimes can be more complex as the logic is abstracted away from the component, and sometimes it is hard to trace through multiple layers to understand the behavior of the custom hook. Third is the over abstraction. There are risks of over abstracting logic into hooks, which can sometimes lead to less straightforward code if not managed carefully. And last one is the performance concern. If we are using the custom hooks and if we are not implementing it correctly, then sometimes it can produce unnecessary re-renders of our application, and this can be a performance concern of using custom hook pattern. So we have already discussed the pros and cons of using this pattern. Now let's implement the same use timer custom hook into Visual Studio Code. So I have already bootstrapped my React application using Vite. So you can simply use the command npm create vite @latest and you can get your project. Now I will just give you a quick walkthrough of the project. I have a Vite config file where I have defined the server port 3002, and then if we go to our app.jsx, then this is the pretty standard app.jsx we get with the Vite, and we can just run our application on localhost. So what I will do is we will just start our development environment, and I'm going to use the npm run dev, and this is going to start my server on localhost 3002. So this is how our application looks like. Now what we are going to do is, since we have to build the stopwatch and the countdown functionality, so I'm going to go to my source folder and I'm going to create a components folder where all my presentation components will be there. Then I'm also going to create a hook. So let's have a hooks folder which is going to contain all the hooks. Now in my components folder, I'm going to create a file which will be a countdown component, so countdown.jsx, and I will simply use RSC to get the boilerplate of my function component. Let's create the other one. So I will go back here and then we are going to create the stopwatch component. So I'm going to have the stopwatch.jsx, and we are going to use the snippet to get the boilerplate code. All right, so we have these two components. Now in the hook, we are going to create a hook that is going to contain all the logic related to the stopwatch and a countdown timer. So I'm going to go to the hook and let's create a new file which will be the use timer.js. And since we are using this JS extension and JSX for our components, because our component is going to have a JSX part, whereas our use timer is purely going to have the stateful logic and the effects. So now what I will do is, first let's write down the custom hook. So in the custom hook, what we want is I'm going to create the function first. So let's have the RSC, and this is going to give me a function component. So I have the use timer. All right, I will just remove, not using this one, so I will just remove them. And the props that we will get for this use timer will be the initial seconds. So let's have a initial seconds, and we define the default value as 0. And we will also need one more prop which will be the is countdown, that will let us know that okay, we need this logic to be used for the countdown. All right, so now we have this. Now next what we will do is we are going to create a couple of states. The first state will obviously be the seconds. So I will have a constant. We are going to have the seconds that we want to display it on the screen. So we are going to have the seconds, and let's have the use state for this. So I'm going to have the use state, and I will pass the initial state will be the initial seconds. All right, next I will need the active so that I can build the functionality of start and stop. If it's an active, that means it's a start. If it's a inactive, that means it's a stop. So I'm going to create a boolean which will be is active, and I will have the set is active, and we are going to have a use state, and the initial state will be false. All right, and the third one, I will create a ref variable using the use ref hook. So I will have the interval ref, and we are going to use the use ref, and I'm going to give the initial value as null. So for those who don't know what is use ref hook is and how it is used, the use ref hook have two different features to be used. One is obviously it gives you a reference to an HTML element, but you can also store a value in the use ref.current state. So if you want to learn more about the use ref, then I have a dedicated dedicated video on the useref hook, you can just click on the card above, or you can also find the video link in the description of the video. Alright, so we have all these three states. Next, what we are going to do is let's create some functions. So I'm going to have a start function. Alright, so this will be an arrow function, and in the start, what we are going to do is whenever it's a start, we are going to set the is active as true. All right, the next function we want is to stop, so we are going to have a stop, and whenever we click on the stop, what we need to do is we need to set this is active as false. And we can also create a reset as well. So for the reset, what we will do is whenever it's a reset, we have to reset the is set active. So I'm going to have the is set active as false, the initial value, but along with that I will also need to have the seconds, so those seconds should also get the initial value, which is the 0 seconds. All right, so that's how we know that we have reset our timer. All right, so now we have this, and in the end what we will do is we are going to return from here. So what we will return from here is we are going to return the seconds that we want to print. We are going to return the start function. We are going to return the stop function, reset function, and we are also going to return the is active boolean. All right, so we have all this returned. Now what we need to do is, since it's a stopwatch, so whenever you click or start on the stopwatch, it is going to have this counter 0, 1, 2, 3, which are the seconds. So for that we can just make use of a use effect. So let's have a use effect, and this use effect will be having an arrow function. All right, and in this use effect what we will do is that if is active, that means the timer has started. Let's write the functionality first for the stopwatch. So for the stopwatch, if it's active, then we all have to update this interval ref. So we are going to have this interval ref dot current, where we are going to store the values, and there we can set an interval function. So let's have a set interval function. This set interval function will be running in every seconds. So that's how we are going to increase the stopwatch: 1 second, 2 second, 3 second. So when every time this interval function runs and it sets the value, what we will do is we are going to have this set seconds, and in the set seconds it is going to give us the previous seconds. So we will have the previous seconds, and then we are going to create an arrow function. Now what we will do here is that we will just return here. What we are going to return from this is we will just take the flag that if countdown. All right, if this is true, then in that case what we will do is we are going to take the previous value and we do -1, because this is a countdown. So maybe we set an initial value of a countdown of 60 seconds. Then if it's a countdown, that what we need to do it after every 1 seconds or after every 1000 milliseconds, we have to make the countdown to 59, then 58, then 57. All right, but if it's not the case, then in that case we will assume that it's a stopwatch, so we need to increase the previous seconds. So we are going to have the previous second plus 1. All right, so we have this, and after that what we will do is if it's else, then we will also handle the reset case. So if it's else, this means the is active is false, and along with that is active, we are also going to check on the internal ref dot current. All right, then in this case we are going to just clear our interval that we have already stopped our stopwatch. So let's have the clear interval, and in the clear interval I'm just going to clear the seconds. So I have the ref dot current. All right, we can also have to apply a cleanup functions so that we can just do a cleanup once the component is destroyed. So for that I will have a arrow function, and I'm just going to do a clear interval, and I will clear the interval ref dot current. All right, so we have this complete logic added here, and we also need to make sure that whenever this is active gets changed, because if someone is going to click on a start, is active will change. If someone going to stop, is active will change. So that's why we will have to have a dependency of is active, and along with the is active we will also need to have the countdown. So the countdown can be a true or the countdown can be false. So I will have the is countdown here. All right, now this is the case for I will just minimize this. Now we will see that this is the case for the stopwatch, but what happens if it's a countdown? Then in that case what we need to do is we need to add an additional condition if the countdown is 0. So that means if is countdown is true and our previous second is less than equals to 0, that means the countdown is already done. Then in that case we will just need to clear our interval. All right, because once the countdown comes to a 0, then it will not go anywhere. So that's why we have to just clear our interval that it has stopped. So we will just refresh the value. So we have the interval ref current which will clear the value, and we are going to just return 0. All right, I will just remove this. So we have written a lot of logic here. Let's go through it. So we have created 3 state variables. First one is the seconds, which is going to hold the timer seconds. Next one is the active, which is going to give us start, stop, reset. And the third one is to store the value, which is the useRef. So we are going to use the useRef.current to store the value. Then we have 3 functions for the start, stop, and reset of our timers. And we return the seconds, all the 3 functions, and there is active boolean. Now in the use effect, what we do is we first check that if it's an active, that means the countdown or the stopwatch is started, and in that case we have to update the interval value. So interval.current is actually holding the value, and this value will be updated after every 1000 milliseconds. So if it's a stopwatch, then it will change from 1 second to 2 second, 2 second to 3 second. If it's a countdown timer, then it will go from 60 seconds to 59, 59 to 58. So that's where we have put this logic here. All right, and then in the end we just do a cleanup. Now let's see how we can use this into the countdown and the stopwatch. So let's go and first write the stopwatch. So I'm just going to remove this, and here what we will do is we are going to have a constant which we are going to use the use timer hook, which contains all the logic. So this use timer exposes the seconds that we want to use. It also exposes the is active flag. It exposes the start function, stop function, and reset function. All right, now if we want to use them, what we will do is we are simply going to have a h2, and here we will mention the stopwatch. All right, after that I'm going to have a paragraph tag, and in this paragraph tag we are going to use the seconds that we want to display, and I'm going to put s here, which will indicate the seconds. I'm also give a class name which is a digit, so I already have a css added for the digit, and then we just create 3 simple buttons for the start, stop. So I'm going to have a button, I'm going to have a on click on that button, so let's have a on click, and we can just have a start, so that will give us a start button. And I will also add a disabled on that button. So if it's already started, then you can just stop it. If it's a stop, then you can just start it. So I will just keep it disabled as well. So I have is active that, and I'm going to use the start here. All right, I will just copy and add the same for the stop and reset. So I'm going to change this to stop. This will get changed to reset. This will get changed to stop, and this will get changed to reset. All right, for the reset, I don't want to disable this button. I want to keep it active, so a user can reset at any time. And for the stop, I will just going to have a exclamation here. So if it's true, and then this will become false. All right, now we will go and check into the browser, but before that we can also write the same logic for our countdown timer. So what I will do is I'm going to simply copy this. I'm going to go here and I'm going to put it here so that we can just use it. Instead of stopwatch, I want to give this as a countdown this time. All right, and we will also going to use the timer. So for the timer, what I will do is I'm going to have a constant use timer. All right, and to this use timer we need to pass the initial value. So I will have the initial seconds, and it's a countdown, so I'm going to use the is countdown flag as true. All right, we are going to pass the initial value as a prop, so I will have a initial value here. All right, now this is going to expose us the seconds, then the start button, then the start function, stop function, reset function, and it is going to have the is active flag. All right, we have everything. Now I'm just going to remove this, and we have this as a countdown, we have this as a digit, then we have the start, but we also make sure that if it's active, and along with that, if the seconds are already 0, then in that case also we want to disable, because it's already the countdown is already completed and we cannot start it again. All right, then this will become is active and we keep it as a reset. All right, now let's go to the app.js and let's use it. So before using it, I will just remove all the stuff which we have received default from our Beat project. All right, I will also remove this, and we are also going to remove these 3. Okay, now we can just use those components, the presentation components which we have created. So what I will do is I'm going to have an h2 tag here, and in this h2 what I will write is I will write the custom hook design pattern, and then we can just use our components. So I have a stopwatch component. All right, and the second one is the countdown. So let's have the countdown, and we need to pass the initial seconds. So the initial countdown I want is for the 60 seconds. All right, so we have done it pretty much, and now let's go and try to run this application. So I'm going to go to my browser, and if I refresh it, then I don't see anything, and we might also have some errors. So let's go to the console and check. So if I go to the console and check, then we see that there is a issue with reading the initial seconds. So I'm going to go here and we see that there is a problem with the initial seconds. So let's go and check. So I'm going to go back. I will just copy this initial second, go to the timer. I'm going to put this initial second and I'm going to put the initial seconds here. Okay. And since we have this initial missing props validation. So in my last video, we already seen that we can use it via prop type, but this time I will just do a disable so that I don't see this error. All right. And now if we go to the timer, then I will just paste it here and I'm going to paste it here. And we are also going to change this initial second here so that we don't have this typo. All right, now let's go and check. So if I refresh it, I still get an error, and the error is because we are destructuring the props here. But when we go and check into our countdown, then we see that we are just passing as the initial seconds and true. So we don't need to destructure, we just need to use them. So let's go back and we are going to remove these brackets. All right, so now it should work. So if we go here and if I go then you should that if I refresh it, then it works. So if I start it, then you will see that this will change to 1 second, 2 second, 3 second. And if I give a start on here, then it will just do the countdown of 60 seconds. So it will just go on 59, 58, 57, and we can just stop it. So now this will get stopped. And if we reset this, then this will get reset. And if we want to stop this, then this will get stopped. If we want to reset, then it will get reset to 60 seconds. So that's how you will see that we are building two different components, stopwatch and countdown, but they both use the same states, the same logic, and they also have the same side effects. So that's how, with the help of this custom hook, we have this separation of concern. All the logic is written in the hook file, whereas the components are just for the presentation purpose. So this also helps us to do the code reusability. So we have reused the complete code of our use timer for both the functionalities, as well as if you see, then sometimes it becomes a bit difficult to debug the issue since majority of your logic is written in your hook file. So whenever there is an issue, the higher chances that will be the issue is in the custom hook, not in the presentational components. So this was a very important React design pattern which you need to learn if you are a beginner or you are just starting with the React or you are an experienced professional, because in a lot of interviews you're going to ask some of the design patterns which you have implemented into your project or in your application. Alright guys, so before we jump directly to the Visual Studio Code, we will first go through the slides as usual and try to understand what higher order component design pattern is, why we use it in our React application, and what are the pros and cons of using this pattern. So higher order component are advanced design pattern in React application for reusing component logic. Now here we will see that we have a simple app component in our project, and this app component has three different components inside it: the dashboard component, the profile component, and the login component. Now what we need to do is we need to build a logic that will check whether the user is authenticated or not. And if this user is authenticated, then we will just navigate the user to dashboard or profile page, but we don't have to repeat ourselves. So we have to reuse our logic, and for that what we will do is we are going to create a withAuth HOC, which is a higher order component function which is going to accept components, and that is also going to contain some common logic. And this auth component will return the new component with enhanced feature, and we will be reusing our authentication logic. So let's see that we have this app component which has the dashboard and a profile. We pass these two components into the withAuth, which is a higher order component, and in return we get a new component which is the authenticated dashboard and the authenticated profile, and they both use the same logic for checking the user authentication status. Now this was a basic idea of higher order component. Now let's see what are the pros of using this HOC design pattern in React application. The first one is code reusability. Higher order component allows you to reuse logic across multiple components, keeping our code dry, which is do not repeat yourself. The next one is separation of concern. By encapsulating common behavior in higher order components, you separate concerns and keep your component focused on their primary responsibilities. Next, it provides the enhanced readability. HOC makes it easier to understand the purpose of the component. In our example, the component was wrapped with withAuth HOC. It's clear that it requires authentication. And the last one is decoupling. HOC decouples behavior from components, making components easier to test. Now let's see what are some of the cons of using this HOC pattern. The first one is the wrapper hell. Using multiple HOCs on a single component can lead to a wrapper hell, making it hard to allow the flow and understand which HOC are applied and in what order. So sometimes it's really important to understand how we apply the HOC. Next one is the prop collision. HOC needs to pass down all the necessary props to the wrap components. If not handled correctly, there could be a prop named collision or missing props. And we are going to see all this when we actually implement the example of HOC. The third one is the reduced performance. Each higher order component creates a new component in the React component tree. If overused or poorly implemented, it can lead to increased render time and impact our performance. So we have to be very careful when we use HOC in our application. And the last one is debugging complexity. HOC can make debugging more challenging because you need to trace through multiple layers of wrapped component to identify issues. Now we have already understood about HOC pros and cons. It's time to implement the example which we just saw in our slide. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code. Alright guys, so I have already bootstrapped my React project using Vite. You can just use it npm create vite @latest and you can bootstrap your project. Now in this project, I have just added the config for the server where I will be using the port 3001 and I added a property of open which is true. Now if I go to my source folder, inside the source folder, I have a app.jsx which is empty. We have no JSX returning from this app component. Then I have two folders, which is the components folder where I have two components, dashboard and a profile, and these components we actually saw in our slide. For the HOC, I have this with auth.jsx which is going to handle our authentication logic. And if we go to our package.json, then you will see that in the package.json I have a simple react DOM and react router DOM dependency. Now what we are going to do is since we have two components, dashboard and profile, and in our app.jsx we are going to add the routes for dashboard, profile and login. So I'm going to go here and I will simply import. So I will import here browser router as router. So this is a very standard implementing the routes, and I will have the routes and I will have the route. All right, now we are going to use them here. So I will have the router first. Inside the router I'm going to have my routes, and inside the routes I will have the route. So I will have the route where I will give the path. So my path will be dashboard and I have to give the element. So for now I will just keep it as empty. All right, I will just copy for the other two routes as well. So I will copy here, I will add here, and I will have a profile, I will have a slash which is going to have a login, and here I will simply add a small JSX. So I will add the H1, I will add here higher order component, and with this I will also add one more div, and that div is going to contain that this is a login page for unauthenticated users. All right, so I have added these two. Now what we have to do is we are also having this slash dashboard and profile, and if we go and see that we have already created these two components. So let's write a simple component here. So I'm going to have RSC, which is going to give me a component, and inside this I'm simply going to have an H1 which will say that it is a dashboard, and I will have a paragraph tag where I will just have a text welcome to the dashboard, only authenticated users can see this. All right, and I will just copy this because I'm going to have a very similar in my profile as well. I can also remove this because I'm not using it. And if we go to the profile, I will simply add the RSC, and this is going to give me a profile component, and I'm going to add the same thing here where I will just change this to profile page, and I will have this here as this is the profile page. All right, so I have both the components here, and now if we want to try it, then what we can do is we can just add a dashboard component here. All right, so it's got auto imported, and I will have a profile component here. So I will have the profile component here. All right, so we have this. Now if we want to give a try, we can just give a try. So I will just remove this, and I will run my application using npm run dev, and this is going to start my application at localhost 3001. 1. Now we don't see anything here. Let's give a try. If I go to a dashboard, what do I see? So I'm going to go to the dashboard and I see that dashboard, welcome to the dashboard, only authenticated user can see. If I go to the profile, I see the profile. Then if I go to the home page, I see that higher order component login page for unauthenticated users. Now what we are trying to do here is that if we go back to our Visual Studio Code, then what I want is, let's say we are building some authentication functionality and we want that only authenticated users should be allowed to go to the dashboard and a profile page. So for that, we always need to check a token. If there is a valid token, we will allow the user to navigate to dashboard and a profile. But if the token is expired, we will navigate the user back to the login screen. And now we have to implement this logic with the help of an HOC. Here, HOC will fit perfectly to implement it because it is going to share the logic of authentication between these two components. So let's write that. So what I will do is I'm going to use the RSC to get the component here. All right. And this component will return some kind of a JSX. So first thing what it will do is that HOC component takes a component as an argument. So I'm going to have the wrap component here. All right. And in the end, we have to return this wrapped component with all the props. So what I will do is I will just remove this and I will create a function that will be returned from the HOC. All right. And this is going to take the prop. Now what we can do is I will be using a navigate so that I can navigate back to the login if it's not authenticated. So I will have a navigate which is equals to the use navigate. All right. And along with this, I will also have a constant for is auth. All right. And let's say you have some service or you have your token into your local storage. So you can just use the local storage.get item and get your token. But for this example, for the sake of simplicity, I will simply use a boolean which is true. Now what we will do is we are just going to use a use effect that we want to run this only once. So here I'm going to have a use effect and I will do a console.log of my token. So I will have the user authentication and I will just print the value here so that we can see it in the console, which is the is auth. All right. So I will go here and I will just simply make a check that if is auth is false, in that case, I want my user to get navigate to the login, which is the slash. All right. We can also put the dependencies here. So I will have the dependency as is auth and wherever the navigate gets changed. All right. So it's a very simple logic. We did not do much. We are just checking the is auth value and then decide whether we have to navigate the user to the login or not. Now, once we have this, what we will do is we are going to have a return here and then we are going to return our new enhanced component. So the new enhanced component will be is auth. If it's true, then in that case, I just want to have my wrapped component and we need to give all the original props to it. So I will have the spread operator and I will spread the props. All right. But if this is a false, then in that case, what I want is I'm going to have a simple div and I'm going to write null into it. All right. And that's all. That is what we are going to do. Now, what we will do is if I hover this, you will see that I get a complaint here. Component definition is missing display name. So now this is an ESLint error. Now there are two ways to resolve this. Either you can do a quick fix and you can just disable this for this entire file, or I will also show you how you can just resolve this error. So before that, what we will do is we are going to go to the app.jsx, and in the app.jsx, what I will do is I will have that constant, and here I will take the enhanced component, which is the authenticated dashboard, and this will be equals to the, we are going to use the HOCs. So I'm going to use the with auth and I will just pass the dashboard here. So my higher order component is going to take the component, which is a wrapped component, and it is going to enhance it and then give me a new component, which is this authenticated component. I can have a very similar for my profile as well. So I'm going to use authenticated profile, which will be equals to the with auth, and I'm going to pass the profile here. All right. Now we can just display this enhanced components. So I'm going to use the enhanced component here, and I will use the enhanced component into my profile. All right. So basically I have to take it out of the return. So I have to remove this, cut and put it here. All right, now I can give a try. So if I go back here, and currently the authentication is true. So if I go to a dashboard, I should be able to go to the dashboard. If I go to profile, I should be able to go to the profile. And now if I just change it to false, now we are on a profile page, I will go and change this to false. So if I change this to false, immediately navigate it to the login screen. So if I try to access the dashboard now, I will be thrown to the login screen because I have this is auth flag as false. So that's how you will be able to see that we are using this logic using the HOC, and then we get this authenticated profile. Now these can only be accessible whenever the authentication flag is true. All right. So if I make this true again, then I will be able to go to the dashboard. So now we have true. We can go to the dashboard. We can also go to the profile. And as soon as we make it false again, we will be navigated to login. All right. Now I will show you how we can resolve this. So this actually gives you a component definition is missing display name. So every component in the linting, there is a rule that every component should have a display name. So what I can do is I can just remove this. I can have a constant and I can just use a name to this component. So with auth component. All right, and now I have the with auth as a name of my display name of my component, and in the end what I have to do is I simply have to return the component here. So I will have my return component here. All right, so now you will see that we don't see any error because now we have provided a display name to a component. So that's why we don't see an error, but our functionality will still work as it is. So we are on the login, and if we go to the dashboard, then we will be thrown back to the login. And if I make this as true, then if I go to dashboard now, then we should be able to go to the dashboard. So that was a very simple HOC component which actually shows you how powerful this design pattern is. You can use the same logic on multiple components. So let's say you have a bigger application where you have a lot of components which should have a protected routes. So in such cases, you can just use the HOC design pattern and you can solve this problem of separation of concern. You can also maintain the readability of your code and you don't repeat your logic in all the places of your application. And this example also shows you can use the higher order component function using functional components. So a lot of examples you will find that they are using a class component, but this is a classic example how you can use a function component to write an HOC. So that's all I have in this video. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter for latest updates. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.